Hi YouTube, Neil here with FaceliftInteriors. Welcome back to our channel. In this week's video, we're going to be showing you how to cut, sew and fill a bolster cushion, which is one of these. Now, bolster cushion is mainly a decorative piece. Some have them along the sides of the arms, like we've got it here. Or sometimes they have them on chaise lounges. Sometimes they're fixed so they don't move. And some people use them removable for the lumbar support at the bottom of your back. So as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you'll see when new videos become available. Also, don't forget to follow us over on Instagram. We'll put the link up here somewhere. During the week, we like to do lots of little tips and tricks on the Instagram as well. So make sure you follow us over there. So there's gonna be loads of sewing tips and tricks in this video. So without further ado, this is how you cut, sew and fill a bolster cushion. Action. So in this week's video, we're going to be showing you how we do a bolster. So right, this is a bolster. I believe it's used for, some people put them down the sides of arms, some people put them behind their backs if they need a bit of lumbar support, but this is a rounded bolster and this is what we're going to show you to do this week. The first thing you need to do is measure the size that you want it to finish. So I know that bolster is 5 inches across, which means you want to find a perfect circle, which is 6 inches across. So here we have our paint tin. So 6 inches, so once that's sewn it's going to be 5 inches across because you've got a seam allowance of 1 inch. So lay that on. So we're just going to chalk around here, just a perfect circle, times 2, like so. So now we're just going to cut these out. Right, so that's them 2 cuts. I've already got some piping cut over here. I've cut this piping on the bias, which is at the angle, at an angle like so. So it's got a nice stretch on it and it's a nice finish, because if you're working on something that's curved like this, I would definitely advise cutting the piping at the angle so you've got a nice curve to it, because if you go across the roll or up the roll, the piping tends to be a lot more rigid and doesn't sit as nicely. So if you're doing these, definitely cut the piping on the bias. So now all we need to do is cut our fabric. So what we need to do is check our finished size, which is 22.5. So we're going to cut that 23.5. We're cutting it 23.5 because we want it to finish 22.5. So 1 inch allowance, that's ½ inch of this side, ½ inch of this side. It's going to finish 22.5. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to measure how much fabric I'm going to need, and I'm probably going to allow a little bit extra. So ½ inch there, ½ inch there. So that's 19 inches. So I've allowed ½ inch this side and ½ inch this side of the zip. Another way you can do it, put my piping on here and then measure around it, because if you measure around that now, so I'm just going to put a couple of nips. So if we go halfway to there, that's like 10 inches. So that's 20 inches. So that's probably going to be too much, because once you take your ½ inch sewing, it's going to be much smaller. What I would do is I would sew your piping on and then measure what you're going to need then. So we'll do that now. We'll sew our piping on and then we will measure the face. Once the piping's on, we can see then exactly how much we're going to need. Right, so this is how we sew up our piping. Got our piping cord, got our strip of fabric. So lay that in under the piping foot. Make sure you've got a piping foot on, obviously, and then we'll go forward and back just to get us started. Then what I do is I run my finger down to hold that in place, then hold this with this hand and then hold the back and then push through. So then push through again, so using both hands to control the piping. So as we come towards the end, it's important to make sure your piping's even, so you've got both bits of fabric level here. And what I recommend, if you're using 5mm piping, which is what I use, I would cut your piping. See, some of this looks a bit wide. See there, that looks a bit wide. So what I would do is I would get a board, cut a strip of wood at 4.5mm. That's perfect for piping cord. But that, to me, just looks a little bit wide. So I'm just going to trim some of that off. So I'm just running this through the overlocker just to get a perfect ½ inch. So now I know that that is a perfect ½ inch. all the way along. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew this piping cord onto this circular template. What we're going to do is we're going to make little nips every 1/2 inch so it sits nice and flat on the curve. The reason why half of it is overlocked and the other bit isn't is because I ran it through the overlocker because it was a bit wide, so I wanted to make sure it was perfectly 1/2 inch, but then the cotton snapped, so that's why only a bit of it's overlocked, but it doesn't matter. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start running this round, and you can see what I'm doing here with my fingers. Because I've got these nips, it's going to sit nice and flat for me, and that's why we put the nips in. And that's why you need a perfect 1/2 inch, because you want it to be perfectly even all the way around. All I'm doing here is using my 2 fingers, this one to bend it and this one to hold it in place. Let's do some more. So we work our way around. I can see that the fabric's sitting nice and flat. The whole thing's sitting flat here. It's exactly how we want it to be. So I'm just going to line this up here. I'm just going to cut a bit over what we need. There. Put a couple more nips in here. And then another one in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this one as it is. So what I'm just going to do is strip this back, and I'm going to lay this, just going to go backwards a little bit so I'm out of the way. So I'm going to cut that perfectly even there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut about 1 inch away from that join. Now what I'm going to do is fold that back, lay that one in there and roll that over, and that is our piping joint. I hold that nice and tight. Now we run around with the machine. Now what I do here is I like to go over and then go back again, just to make sure it's stitched nice and tight, because that's where the joint is. Back. And that is the facing to our bolster. So now I'm just going to measure this to see how much fabric we're going to need. I'm just measuring around. There might be a better way of doing this. Right, so I started at the join and now I'm at the join again, so that is exactly 17 inches. So I'm going to go 18 and a half. I might go 3/4 inch allowance for the zip. So just squaring that off, and I'm going to run my ruler up here just to get rid of the selvage. You don't want the selvage. So 23 and a half by 18 and a half, which is what we said. Right, so just going to mark zip there and zip there, and what I might do is here, just about 1/2 inch away from the end, make a couple of nips to follow. So we're going to put our zip on now. I'll put the zip on both sides and then we'll just run the ends on. What we're going to do now is put our zip on. So that's our mark where we nipped. So I'm just going to fold all that under. What I do now is just lay that fabric down 1/2 inch and just run along. Oh, I want to back wind that a little bit. Nice and straight. You'll be able to tell if it's straight. If it kinks, you'll tell it won't look right. So that's our zip on. So I'm going to take that, split that zip, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. So, like we did on the other side, Nice little 1/2 inch turn. Right, so that's our zipper on. So now, I want to make sure that your zip is perfectly even, both sides. So you can see there that that side's a bit longer. So we will nip that off so they're even. So we're going to put our zipper head on like so. 1, 2, and on. So now we've got our seam is bang even and our little join there is perfect. So I'm just going to run that zip up all the way to this, where this point is here. I'm going to leave that like that. So what I'm going to do now is just join these two bits together. These two little flaps at the end. Like so. We're going to do both ends. So now, where this join is here, my piping joint there is going to start there. So I will show you, before I sew this up, I'm going to staple it round to see if it's right, if it's the exact right amount of fabric. So I've stapled it all on. So we're going to start putting this on. So we're just going to get that underneath, set it on the machine where we want it. So now we can start running our end on. Don't worry about the staples, you can just bypass those and take them out later. So I've just finished a bit before the end, so I'm just going to check if we go straight over that. We can just finish off, we can just run straight over the top of that now. Laying our seam nice and flat like so. And we're just going to run over it. Right, so that's our end on. The good thing to do is get rid of all these loose threads. You don't want to leave all these in, so get rid of all your loose threads. So now we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. So I'll run that on and then we will come back to you. I've just sewn up the other side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close these zips off. So what I mean by that is just shutting the zip off. So what I do is just go back and forth with the cottons a few times, just so, with the stitch, just so the zip can't come off the end. So that's one side closed up. Now we're going to go to the other side. So as you can see here, we've got our old bolster interior and we've got our new interior here, our new cover, sorry. So what I did with this is the bolster originally was a bit bigger. So you can see here that it used to have like a Dacron wrapped around it, but I've just made the decision to make it a bit smaller so it's a lot more padded, because it didn't need to be the size that it was. So I've just made it a bit smaller so it's a lot tighter. This one is a feather bolster, and what you normally do is, if you're making a new one, you would speak to your supplier, whether it be a cushion supplier or you were making them yourself. So you'd normally measure across there, and that is 5 inches. So I would make the interior 6 inches. Now these can be quite tricky to make if you want to make them. As this is an old interior, we're not going to do anything with it, but if you was making a new one, I'd measure the diameter, which is 5 inches, and I'd order the interior 6 inches across. And then it's up to you whether you either had it made in, this one's all feathers, or you can have it made in fibre, or you can even have it made in foam, which is a lot firmer. But I'd say firmer ones are, yeah, a lot more decorative. Or if you're going to make your own interior, you make it basically exactly the same as you make the cover. So measure the ends, cut the ends, sew the fabric, sew it round, and you fill it, and then you would like either hand slip the rest of it up or run it through a stitch machine to stitch the last bit up. So if you was going to make your own, that's how I would do it. But I'm just going to show you now how I'm going to fill this. So as you can see here, this is the end. I'm going to push that right up. And also remember, it's important to get your selvage all the same way. Right, so now it starts doing this zip up. I'll pull these two together.
So there it is, filled and ready for action. That is how you make a bolster cushion.